talking about downtown, Toontown.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Downtown Toontown, the podcast dedicated to all things Toontown, Roger Rabbit, and Disney and animation in general. I am your host, Justin, and this is episode 4. Before we get to our exciting new interview, I should share some updates related to the show. I believe I mentioned in episode 2 of having a Facebook group and a Twitter page to the podcast. Both are still the case. You can follow us both on Facebook and Twitter at Downtown Toon Pod. But I have also created an Instagram page. You can now follow us at downtown_Toontown for all updates on the podcast. If you're listening to this, you're probably listening to this either on Libsyn or Apple Podcasts. I have recently posted my last 2 interviews with Gary K. Wolf and Tammy Tuckey, respectively, outside of the full podcast on my YouTube page. While Downtown Toontown has yet to have its own YouTube page, you can find those 2 interviews and other videos at JJ Smith Media. I tend to mostly post Disneyland ride-throughs, including several Toontown ones which I shot just before the land closed in March for its refurbishment. So if you're curious, please like and subscribe. That includes all social media. Like, subscribe, because if you like what you hear, the more likes and subscribes I see, the more likely I'll continue doing the show. Speaking of my interviews with Gary K. Wolf and Tammy Tuckey, I have some more updates regarding both. First off, Gary mentions at the end of my interview that he was publishing a book on Jessica Rabbit sometime within the year. That book is actually now published. It's called Jessica Rabbit, Serious Business. So if you're at all curious about the origin of Jessica Rabbit from the man who created the character himself, go to his website, GaryWolf.com. You can buy a Kindle, paperback, or hardcover book directly from his website. I think he would like that. You can even get an autographed copy of the book if you're so interested. Just email gkw@garywolf.com. I think he'll be able to arrange that for you. Gary is a great guy, so please help support the creator of our beloved Toontown. And still in need of support is Tammy Tuckey, who I interviewed for my last show. She created an Indiegogo campaign called Tammy Tuckey's New Disney-Themed Cover Album. Her campaign ends in about 19 days as of this recording, so please go help Tammy's new album by July 11th. She has a lot of cool projects she's working on, and I hope she gets enough to achieve her dreams. She's got a great album. You'll find me on Main Street, and I'm sure whatever she has planned for the next one will be just as great. There's cool gifts involved, including a physical CD for all you fellow enthusiasts of physical media out there. Please go to Indiegogo, help out our friend of the show. Every donation, no matter how small, helps. And with all those updates out of the way, let's proceed with the interview. My next guest really needs no introduction. In 2007, the Walt Disney Company declared him a Disney legend, the highest honor the company bestows on an individual. He was employed by Disney back in 1957, becoming the first black animator to be hired by the company. His work has been entertaining audiences of all ages from the 1950s all the way to the 21st century. He has personally worked with seemingly everyone from Walt Disney to Steve Jobs. Outside of Disney, he has worked on Fat Albert, Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and even Sesame Street. As Gary Trousdale puts it, he pretty much is the Forrest Gump of animation. He has made recent appearances on shows like The View and Pawn Stars. You can find more detail on his incredible life in this wonderful documentary released back in 2016 called Floyd Norman, An Animated Life, which is available on Blu-ray, and it's currently streaming on the Criterion channel. This podcast is being released on June 22nd, which marks the 87th birthday of our guest, yet he shows no signs of slowing down. He draws and posts on social media almost every day. Please welcome to the show an exceptional man, Mr. Floyd Norman. Floyd, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, there's so much that I would love to ask you about. I actually want to start 2 years ago. You were actually on an episode of one of my favorite shows, Pawn Stars. You remember being on this show?
Yes, I do indeed. In beautiful downtown Las Vegas. I'm Floyd Norman.
The Floyd Norman,
cartoonist since the 1950s, even worked with Walt Disney himself.
Okay, that must have been,
It was exciting.
yeah, I mean, I'm a little overwhelmed. I mean,
So was I.
hey, Corey, this is like one of the main animators for Disney forever.
Oh, wow.
So do you remember Roger Rabbit when you were a kid?
Yeah.
This guy drew it.
Okay. I have buddies with Jessica Rabbit tattooed on them.
Do you remember the items that you brought?
Vaguely. I remember bringing some original Roger Rabbit comic strips.
Yes, that was the most interesting thing you brought, and I would be curious if you could explain what those were and what was your involvement working on that.
Well, wow. We're going all the way back in time, back to the early 80s, when a project that had been percolating at Disney for a number of years, an adaptation of Roger Rabbit, written by Gary Wolfe, and they wanted to make a feature film, and they thought it would be a perfect fit for Disney because it was live action and animation. But for some reason, the film never could get moving. And it wasn't until the new management came in the early 80s. Michael Eisner, Frank Wells brought new management to Disney, and they made a connection with Steven Spielberg and Bob Zemeckis to do a joint production. Amblin and Disney would work together on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And so a very innovative film, a very exciting film. And to go along with that feature-length motion picture, we decided we would do a Roger Rabbit comic strip that would appear in the newspapers. And so we did a number of things on Roger, graphic novels and all sorts of things. But one of those items on our list was a daily comic strip based on the Roger character and the characters in the motion picture. And so we worked on this, created a number of comic strips. Unfortunately, for one reason or another, the comic strip never went anywhere, never took off. And so years later, I discovered these original Roger Rabbit comic strips that were on my shelf. And they were one of the items I took to Pawn Stars to basically find out their value or what somebody might pay for them. So that's how that Roger Rabbit thing came about, and the being one of the items on Pawn Stars.
Yeah. So I am curious, how did you enjoy your time working on comics? Did you enjoy it anywhere near to the level of working on animated films?
Yeah, it's funny. People often ask that question about what did you enjoy more, and I don't regard it as enjoying one thing more or less than something else. Actually, I began my career as a young kid while still in high school, working on a comic book and that was my introduction to being a professional artist and writer, working in comics. Now, of course, I had a love for animation and Walt Disney in particular. So I always knew that one day, sooner or later, I would be headed for Hollywood and the Walt Disney Studio. But to answer your question, it's all storytelling. It doesn't matter whether it's a book, a comic book, or a motion picture, or a TV show. It's all storytelling. And I think I enjoy all of it equally. Um, I don't really have a preference, one thing over another. Might sort of slightly favor the format of feature length animated films, only because that affords you more opportunities. You usually have a bigger budget, you usually have more time, and you can usually create something a good deal more compelling. So if I was to give a nod to anything, it might be the animated feature film.
Oh yeah, well, and animated features, of course, are you're a big part of your career, and I love them. But I am
Yeah.
also the comics are such a fascinating part of the Disney brand that doesn't get talked about a lot. I'm just curious, did you ever
Yeah.
meet your fellow Disney legend Carl Barks?
Oh, yes, I did. On any number of occasions. I was very lucky to meet with Mr. Barks. I was a huge admirer of his work. I read his stories when I was a child. I remember, growing up in my hometown of Santa Barbara and reading those wonderful stories that Carl had written. So when many years later, when I became a grown up and a professional, it was an honor to meet Mr. Barks, and on some occasions to even join him at dinner. I was there
Wow.
when Carl Barks was made a Disney legend. I remember that day in particular. So yeah, I think I've been quite fortunate to have had the opportunity to meet many of my heroes.
Yeah, that is so cool. Do one of the things that interests me about Roger Rabbit as a movie was that it was really the first quote Disney film that actually have to be animated outside of the Burbank lot at Disney, outside of Disney. It was, of
Yeah.
course, animated in London by Richard Williams'
Right.
studio. I am
Yeah.
curious, did you ever get offered to work on that? Did you ever have any opportunity?
Well, to be honest, I knew about the Roger project from the beginning, and even attended a number of meetings over at Steven Spielberg's company, Amblin, which was located on the Universal Studio lot, not that far from Disney. So we made many trips over to Amblin. I never did meet Mr. Spielberg, ironically enough.
He's just about the only person you didn't meet.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I met a lot of people, but every time I was at the Amblin Studios, Steven Spielberg was never there. So I never met him back in those days. But to answer your question, I had a job working in Disney publishing, working on books and comics and pretty much anything that was in print. And I knew that there was no way in the world I could do both print and motion pictures. So I had to make a choice. And I remember speaking with Andreas Deja, who was headed to London to work on the film with Richard Williams. And I remember telling him, oh, I wish so much that I could join you guys in London. I would so love to work on what I knew then was going to be a groundbreaking motion picture. I couldn't do that because I had a job at Disney Publishing. I had responsibilities there, and so I had to just. And yet, I was able to be in touch with the filmmakers. So, in one sense, I was able to share this, creative process because I continued to stay in touch with the animation personnel. And eventually, when we added a unit here in Southern California, because the picture had a hard and fast deadline. The deadline was set when the film had to be released to theaters. And Richard Williams and his team over in London, they could not crank out the animated footage quickly enough. So we had to establish a second unit here in Burbank to do the rest of the animation. So I would go to that studio because, after all, it was nearby. So, in many ways, I felt really connected to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, even though I never actually worked on the animated segments myself.
Yeah. You may not have worked on Roger Rabbit, but you did work on that other great Disney movie that combined animation and live action, which was Mary Poppins back in 1964. You have any fond memories of working on that?
Many fond memories. I guess one could speak hours about that amazing project. I mean, it was an epic endeavor, and that began long before the picture even moved into production. There's so much story to this whole Mary Poppins episode. You might remember that a motion picture was made, a film entitled Saving Mr. Banks, was all
Right.
about Walt Disney trying to convince the author, P.L. Travers, to allow him to make an animated adaptation of Mary Poppins. And there was so much that went on there that it even engendered another motion picture. But the whole process of doing Mary Poppins back in the 60s, it was a very exciting project. I would say it was one of those projects that really, that Walt Disney probably enjoyed more than most of the things he was doing. It was a very exciting motion picture. It was a very big motion picture. It involved a lot of people, a lot of talent. It involved both live action and animation. Of course, our stars were Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke, and just a marvelous cast. And all of us as animators were also involved because we had to create the animated segments. And of course, we couldn't even do this until after the live action was shot. It's one of the things when you're combining live action with animation, you have to wait until the live action is photographed before you can begin your work. So you can't get out ahead of live action. You have to follow live action. So after the shooting wrapped up on Mary Poppins, I think we were on that production for at least another year doing the animation. Yeah, it took about a year to complete the animation, which had to be composited with the live action film before the film could be completed. But I do remember it being a very exciting project. I loved working on Mary Poppins. I loved working with my team of animation professionals, along with our live action counterparts. It was just a splendid collaboration, and we had a ball making that film. And I always knew it was going to be a big hit. We just felt deep down inside that Mary Poppins was going to be a very special motion picture.
Yeah, and it was. And is it significantly harder as an animator to work on a live action film that combines animation as opposed to just an animated movie?
Well, there are challenges when you are combining animation with live action. I wouldn't say it's any more difficult to work on a hybrid film like that. I would say you have to be a good deal more meticulous in terms of matching your animation to the live action. One of the things most notable that generally when you're working with compositing live action with animation, the animation has to be done on ones. And that is, for every live action frame of film, there has to be an animated frame of film generated. And that means our animation, which is usually done on twos, that is 2 frames for every image that goes on the film, we do our animation on twos. When you're compositing with live action, you have to do the animation on ones. That means you have to draw literally every frame of film because it has to composite perfectly with its live action counterpart. So in that sense, it's a good deal more work. It's a more meticulous, a little bit more tedious, but it is just as creative. But it's always a challenge, and I think even now, in the modern age where animation can be composited digitally, I think it's still a lot of work when you're trying to put those two pieces of film together. Of course, today there's no film; everything is digital, but it still involves a good deal of work.
Yeah, I mean, and you've had, your work and your life, you've had an exceptional, career that, I wish we could go all over it with our time. But the good
Yeah.
news is we don't have to, because you've have a fantastic documentary that was made about you. I've seen it twice. It's great.
Wow.
It's called Floyd Norman, The Animated Life. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, who was the lucky person who approached you to get that film made, and how did they get the job?
Well, it's one of those things, but the way films began, sometimes it's quite surprising and sometimes quite unexpected. What happened was it was during the San Diego Comic Con, a big comic book convention that happens every year out here in Southern California. And I was going over to congratulate the filmmaker because he had just completed a documentary on the life of the famous poster artist, Drew Struzan. And so that's when I first met the filmmaker, Eric Sharkey. And as I was speaking with Eric, he was looking for a follow-up project, like what would he do next? And somebody mentioned, well, here's your next project right here, pointing to me. And the filmmaker thought, hey, wait a minute. Maybe this guy's life and career just might make a good documentary. And so he went back to New York, met with his partner, and a few weeks later, they gave me a telephone call. I was at the Walt Disney Studio. They called me up and said, we would like to do a documentary of your life and career. And I said, are you sure you want to do this? And they were determined to make this film. So I said, okay, if you really want to do it, I'm happy to jump on board. And so that's how the whole thing began.
Yeah, it's really, I love the documentary because, I've been following your career for, quite a while. Like, I've been reading your articles, that you posted on Jim Hill like 20 years ago now.
My,
Yeah,
yes, that's right.
There was stuff, that, I thought I knew a lot about your life. And when I saw this, there was a lot of stuff that I had no idea about. Like, I had no idea that you went to war and that you attribute being an animator and like cartoons saving your life, which I think is exceptional.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I gotta give a little credit to Jim Hill because it was Jim who encouraged me to start writing about my adventures in the animation business. I didn't know anybody would have any interest in that aspect of my life. And Jim Hill said, no. He says, you've got animation history here. You knew all of these famous animators. You knew and worked with Walt Disney. You should write this stuff down. So it was really Jim Hill who got me started writing and in a way beginning to document my life and career in the animation business.
Yeah, I mean, is there any part of your career looking back that you're actually surprised that you were involved? I mean, I could, think, from the documentary, like I had no idea you animated the logo to Soul Train. Like that
Yeah. Well, one's life is sometimes full of surprises. A lot of things that happen. I had no, they just happened. It was part of just my living my life and doing my job. And sometimes there are, some unpleasant surprises, but for the most part, most of the surprises in my life have been pleasant ones, oftentimes unexpected, but they've been great. And I think in many ways I've been a very lucky guy to have had the opportunity to work on so many wonderful projects, wonderful films, both television and feature length, live action and animated films. I've done a lot of different things, and it's all been great fun. Sometimes it's been a challenge, but I have no regrets. I've had a wonderful time during my career. It's just been really terrific.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this film started off as like a Drew Struzan project. What I thought, even down to the poster of this movie, Drew Struzan, drew the poster with you.
Yes, he
like,
did.
How does it feel to be the subject of a Drew Struzan poster? Because I know a lot of people. You've done something a lot of people are trying but have failed, which is try to get Drew Struzan out of retirement. So how does it feel to be, alongside heroes like Indiana Jones and Luke Skywalker and Harry Potter and so on?
Well, again, that was a wonderful surprise, and that Drew Struzan illustration that was on my movie poster. I never expected that to happen. What happened was we were having a birthday party. Actually, it was a surprise birthday party because I had no knowledge of it. They had a party for me at the Walt Disney Studio when I turned age 80. And people, they brought me presents, and it was my birthday. And Drew Struzan, for my birthday, did this portrait of me. And, as a gift, because he wanted to give me something and he didn't know what to give me. So he did a painting of me. And then sometime later, when the documentary had been completed, the producers were looking around like, well, what's the poster for this documentary film? And one of the guys said, hey, why not use the Drew Struzan portrait that Drew had painted for Floyd? Why not use that? And so that became the poster of our movie. It became the cover of the DVDs. And it was all through the generosity of my friend and colleague, Drew Struzan. And what an honor. This is a guy who's painted movie posters for guys like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and so many other top filmmakers. Guillermo del Toro, so many famous filmmakers, and Drew has done the poster for their film. And here now I have a Drew Struzan poster for my film. What an honor to have someone like Drew do a painting for me, and it becomes the poster of my documentary. So again, it's another surprise, another very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, absolutely it is. That's a great story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one of my favorite projects that you've, been involved in and worked on is The Jungle Book, which, as far as I understand, is having a pretty big, you're going to be traveling for a event related to The Jungle Book. If you want to plug it in now, want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to visit the Walt Disney Family Museum. It's located at the Presidio in San Francisco, California. But there's also an exhibit hall at the Walt Disney Family Museum, and the newest exhibition will be a marvelous exhibition on The Jungle Book, Walt Disney's final film. A film that we completed back in 1966. Ironically, the same year Walt Disney passed away. But Andres Deja has curated this marvelous exhibition of Walt Disney's last film, The Jungle Book, a film that I was honored to work on with Walt Disney back in 1966. And a film that will be celebrated at the Walt Disney Family Museum, opening next week. Up at the Presidio. Those of you who live in San Francisco or are willing to make the journey to San Francisco, visit the Walt Disney Family Museum and see a marvelous collection of original art from this film that was so entertaining and has entertained so many millions of people around the world. It was actually Walt Disney's last film, but a film that I was lucky enough to work on, The Jungle Book.
Yeah. What would be your big like takeaway that you want to leave guests leaving about either, the Jungle Book or Walt Disney or, just your career in general?
Well, it's kind of ironic that I would end up working on the Jungle Book because I had never planned to work on that motion picture. And it wasn't even my decision to work on the Jungle Book. It came from Walt Disney. It was Walt Disney who got me on the Jungle Book way back in 1966. Because Walt Disney, I don't know if you know the story, but Walt Disney had a disagreement with his top storyteller, his top writer, storyboard artist, Bill Peet. Bill had done an adaptation of the Kipling novel, and Walt Disney did not like it. He was not pleased with what Bill had done with Kipling, and he wanted to start over again. And Walt Disney put together a new story team to rewrite the Jungle Book, and I was part of that new team of story artists who had to rewrite the movie from scratch, pretty much. And so that's how I came to be involved with the Jungle Book, because it was a decision not made by myself, but a decision made by the big boss himself, Walt Disney. But having been added to the crew of the Jungle Book, I look back on it now and realize another incredible opportunity to be able to work on this remarkable film, but even more so, to be able to work with Walt Disney himself. Not many people can say they worked with Walt Disney. What a special treat, what a special honor to be able to be in meetings with Walt Disney over the course of a year. But that's what happened to me back in 1966. And I'm so very grateful that I had that opportunity to work on a remarkable film and to work with one of the greatest storytellers, Walt Disney. So again, another unexpected pleasure.
Well, your time is precious. I know we're running low on your, very valuable time to spending. But before you go, I have to ask, one big question that
Sure.
I have about from the documentary.
Yeah.
Do you still quote find yourself floidering around the studio? Because I know COVID has sort of put a damper on a lot of that. Do you still find yourself doing that?
Well, thankfully, I'm able to Floyder again, and of course that term comes from a young animator who kind of like coined that phrase, Floydering, because it's a mix of Floyd and loitering. So when Floyd loiters around the Walt Disney studio, Floyd is doing more than just loitering. I'm actually Floydering. And thankfully, having survived the pandemic, having been cooped up at home for the past 2 years, thankfully, we're able to return to work. And I can honestly say it was a real joy to be at the Walt Disney Studios just yesterday, where I was able to reunite with many of my colleagues, many of whom I hadn't seen in over 2 years, because when the studio shut down because of the pandemic a couple of years ago, and we began working remotely, a good many of us had not seen each other in person, face to face, in over 2 years. So it was a real joy to return to the Walt Disney Studios yesterday and to continue to loiter around the Disney Studio campus and to continue to carry on a long-standing tradition, and that is Floydering. So Floyd is Floydering again at the Disney Studio, and I'm so happy to be back there after being away for over 2 years.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. And I want to tell all my listeners, if you happen to see Floyd at either a con or some special event, be sure to go up to him and, tell, because this guy has had so many great stories. He's got, he's got so much talent, he may even draw you something. So Floyd, thank you so much for your very valuable time. I loved hearing all your stories. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. It's been great talking with you. It's been great sharing these stories with you. Like I said, I've been a very lucky guy being at the Disney studio during that very special time when Walt Disney was still with us. I can't think of anything more significant than that. And I'm really grateful for the opportunities I've had throughout my life and my career. So it's been just a real delight to share those memories with you.
And we appreciate them. Thanks, Floyd.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Before I close the show, I just want to mention that the Jungle Book exhibit mentioned at the end of the interview will actually be at the Walt Disney Family Museum from June 23rd, 2022, all the way to January 8th of 2023. Floyd will be attending the opening ceremony, which takes place tonight. But if you happen to be in Northern California within the next 6 months, be sure to check out the Walt Disney Family Museum. It's supposed to be an incredible place. I was really excited to be able to talk to Floyd on the show. Be sure to check out that documentary, which again is on the Criterion channel, which might seem like an interesting place for it to be at. I mean, a documentary on Disney animation sitting alongside the likes of The Seventh Seal or My Dinner with Andre. But it is a great and informative doc, well worth your time, well worth you checking out. However, going out of your way to see. It certainly deserves to be on Disney Plus, so check it out when you can. And that should wrap it up for today's podcast. Thanks for listening as always. I'll try to make another episode pretty soon, though I must say, Floyd Norman, a Disney legend who's worked with Walt Disney himself, that's going to be a hard act to follow. But, until then, I hope your day is going well, and I'll see you downtown. Downtown Toontown is an unofficial podcast. It is in no way affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. The opinions expressed on this podcast are mine and mine alone and do not reflect any official member of the Walt Disney Company or the Walt Disney Company itself.